How many cameras are you using today? You're doing 4, aren't you? Like a chill 4. Oh my gosh, look at these guys.
Slides for you.
Oh, let's go. Fear of gods?
Oh, I knew you would know.
Well, I wish I were there with you guys. It'd be a lot better.
He's like, don't you let the snake in the building. He's like, that's the biggest mistake I made because it didn't actually change his trajectory that much.
Where were you to stop? Friends don't let friends raise this kind of money.
We're recording 1, 2, 3, go, even though that's not a thing we do.
I occasionally like to lob a grenade in to just kind of get a conversation going, maybe a little, lighten the mood a little bit.
So the question that I've been thinking about for you guys has been, how is it running a lifestyle business?
Fantastic.
It's been pretty good.
Yeah.
I like that you're smiling.
Yeah, he's so happy.
People have a tortured relationship with that term. And so, I think you've lived both sides of it. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit about, kind of your experience post-transaction, maybe.
First thought when you said that is, one thing maybe getting older is you just care a little bit less about what other people think. And I feel like we're in a spot with Wistia where, we've been working really hard and the business is growing and we've been transforming the product. And I guess I feel good about where it's at. And I feel like if you had asked that question to me, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were like a little less, maybe had like less confidence in what we were doing or what we wanted to become. It would like be like a stinging, have like a visceral reaction. But it's more just like a laugh to that question.
I mean, it's interesting because I think we did the buyback and then we got really profitable and we're like, great. And then like got faster. And so we're growing faster and we're profitable. Like, this is amazing. Holy, it's like all working. And then it was interesting because like we had a lot of stuff work, but we had a lot of hard stuff happen. We had a lot of stuff where we didn't have like the right people on the team, or we were working in a way that wasn't actually enjoyable for us. So it's funny, like lifestyle business, like you build a lifestyle you want, but actually like any business, I think you should be asking, like, what do you actually want to get out of it? And for us, like, not growing isn't fun. We are trying really hard to grow and actually have huge ambitions on what we can do. But the difference is, like, we're in control of our own pace. And so we've done a lot of things, like, in the last 5 years that we've been willing to be really patient on. And, we were extremely profitable. We said, let's be less profitable and invest more back into the company. And then it's like, okay, growth is harder. The tech landscape has changed. Our revenue, we're still growing revenue, but not as fast as we were. Should we still keep investing more back in? And we're like, yes, we believe in the future. And then we've seen the future arrive and it's great. And you look at it, it's like, oh, look, it worked. It all worked. A lot of outside people would probably look at this and be like, oh, how could you do this? How could you basically be this patient? And it's actually just that we have big dreams of like solving these big problems. The work itself is actually fun with how we do it, so it's easy to keep doing it. And what we like doing is solving hard problems. And so it was kind of interesting because I think like before this, it would have been easy to imagine like what you want with like a lifestyle business is just to be like really profitable and like not work on it. And it turns out that's not what we necessarily want.
Yeah,
like
it's not very fun to do
That's not fun. The working on it and solving the hard problems is what's fun. And we're just in a position to like be in control of our own investments and our pace. And that's the biggest difference, I think.
What's interesting because it strikes me there's kind of 2 definitions of a lifestyle business. The one, I don't know, did you guys ever read that book, Small Giants or Little Giants or whatever that book was? His definition of it was a lifestyle business is designed to take more money out of the business to fund your lifestyle. Probably captures more of what people mean when they say lifestyle business in kind of like that derogatory way, in the way that, Brendan, 4 years ago, you would have probably bristled a little bit to have heard that. But there's that other definition, which, I wrote a bit about it years ago, which is more like every business is a lifestyle business. You're just choosing, what lifestyle you want to live. And I think the interesting juxtaposition with Wistia is you've actually lived both of those lifestyles in the same company.
Yes.
And so I'd be curious to hear like how Chris and Brendan 10 years ago would have handled that desire for growth versus like the last, I think the transaction happened, like 7 years ago?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So, the kind of current version that you're living with right now, like how would you contrast those 2 same people, different mindset?
Yeah, I mean, like the way I would say it, I'm interested to hear how you would put it, Brendan, too, is like, I feel like 10 years ago, there was revenue growth was the most important thing, and there was a lot of stress around like short-term numbers. So, oh, our numbers good? Are they good? Oh, they slipped. Like, why is that?
Was that self-imposed or
It was mostly self-imposed, is the truth. That was causing us to be too short-term focused. Also, have it be really not fun. Like before we did the buyback, we were not having fun. We were both really stressed out, and we were doing too many things at once, and we weren't actually like focusing enough, because it seemed like the way to grow was to do lots of things when it's almost too simple to say like, oh, one thing's working, just do that one thing a lot more, which might even be easier, but like it doesn't sound like hard growth. And so it's like you don't default to that way of thinking. And so, yeah, it was just a lot more stressful over the short-term numbers back then. And then after we did the buyback and the business got profitable again, mindsets were able to shift to be much longer term in the same way that they were in the early years when we were smaller. Because when we were smaller, we didn't have the same, it's almost like we had the pressure and it went away. Like we raised angel money, everyone's like, you're gonna go. And we raised angel money in 2008. And then it was like great financial crisis. Everyone's like, oh, this stuff might not work. And it was like 3 years later that things really started to work. And I almost feel like our angels just like did stop talking to us. They're like, whatever, you know? And then when I remember very vividly, we hit 10 million in revenue and they were like, is this gonna be something? Is this valuable? This seems like this is good, you know? They were like sat forward in their chairs, and it was some period after that when the stress started to come, because I think rationally from their perspective, they're like two kids basically building a business. What if they screw it up? You know, I imagine is what they were thinking to some degree. And so a lot of that stress was self-imposed, a lot of that was from the time, and now I think it's interesting because it's much more, we have a really clear vision of where we're going, and the big question is not like, if we're gonna get there. The big question is when do we get there? And then like, we look of course at all the short-term numbers, but there's not as much short-term stress.
Do you look at different numbers now than you did 10 years ago?
It's more nuanced, right?
I think we've gotten a little more the business has grown, it's a little more sophisticated. I think it's like mostly the same set of numbers, more or less, with more depth and probably a better understanding on our side related to like the patients you're talking about of what are the leading indicators.
Yes.
And then understanding that revenue and commercial results will follow that, as opposed to doing something, some new feature launch or some marketing program and expecting everything to change in the next few months. That's where we were, I think, pretty naive.
And I think everybody's naive on that. You think that it's a shortcut. So you think you're gonna launch a feature and suddenly your revenue just changes dramatically. But what often it looks like is you launch a new feature, people try it, a bunch of them leave because they're not actually the target. Some people get value out of it, and you go talk to them and you figure out why, and then you make things better for everybody else, and suddenly you have a small number of people actively using a feature, and there's high retention, like they keep using it. And when you get to high retention features, like they use it every month, then you found something.
Yeah, and you can solve the rest, yeah.
And we've realized that like, if you just have the right patience of this with this process, it's not nearly as stressful. And it's like, a lot of it is like, it's just incremental improvements everywhere across the business at once versus like one big thing at a time. And I think when you're searching for growth really aggressively, it feels like it has to be one big thing at a time.
And I feel like we made some really painful mistakes from a lack of patience that has informed that.
Yes.
Like Soapbox comes to mind. So we were, not the first, but fairly early in the market of, I don't know what that market's officially called, but Loom and
Quick screen recorders.
Quick screen record and share a video. And I think that we made a few mistakes. One, making it a separate product, but probably the biggest mistake is having really like messed up idea of what success looked like there. We had really great usage of that, and we had really good early revenue, but we had set our targets and sights so much higher that we were basically like, it isn't performing what we thought it would do, even though it was a success.
Yeah, we had a
by
year.
Anyone who looked at this.
We had a year where we said we're going to 10x the growth of Soapbox this year. Everyone's like, yeah, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the customers, like we should be able to 10x it, and we 4x'd it, and we thought we had failed. And then years later, we see what the leaked stuff on like Loom's revenue, and we were making more revenue than they were the whole time, basically. But we thought it was a failure because of our perspective. And so,
and then the biggest mistake was we then defunded it.
Yes.
Because we were like, well, this is a failed experiment, so let us like go back and work on the core business. And if we had kept, to Chris's point, like make iterative progress over that period of time, that most certainly would have compounded into something much better. And we're kind of back again there with, we have a recording built into the core product that has pretty good adoption, but like to some extent you're kind of starting some of that over again.
For context, we can talk a little bit about it, because the last time I saw you, the transaction, I think it just closed. And so not that we need to do a whole deep dive, just like a snapshot of like you never went like full venture, but you'd raised from angels, you'd raised enough to feel the weight of having raised like from investors, and you had a board, you had, like the pressures of having investors.
the short version is like, so the company is 18 years old. We started in 2006. Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Amazing.
Started in 2006. We raised our first angel round in 2008. We raised $650,000. And then 2 years later, we basically had run out of the money, but found customer traction, and we raised another 800. So we raised 1.4 million total. That's all we ever raised. Scaled everything else with customers. We were really early in our market. Because we weren't loaded with like venture funding, we could be in control of our own destiny. And so we actually had a lot of competitors in 2008 to 2012 or so that raised venture money, and the market wasn't there.
Overcapitalized.
Yeah, they overcapitalized. They could not grow revenue aggressively enough. They would shut down. We would get their customers, and it was just like a fun thing for us. And then somewhere in there, we just get things. We basically warped our own expectations with too much FOMO, too much like grass is greener. We were really profitable, and we kept hearing from folks like profit bad, growth good, profit bad, growth good. And so we put everything into growth, and it didn't really work, because we weren't focused enough and we didn't have a clear enough vision of what we're doing. And actually we like watered down some of what made us really unique. And it was in that moment we had an opportunity to sell the business, and we decided not to. And we decided not to because we realized we still own the business, we could fix the problems that existed, and we thought if we got profitable, we'd be more long-term focused.
In that push to growth back then, was that with an eye towards like raising one of those monster venture rounds and kind of competing head to head with some of your other better funded rivals, or was that? I
think it was the acquisition. We would give equity to folks, and then we'd be like, someday this company's worth $100 million. And like, wow, that'd be crazy when that happens. Then as the growth started to get there, and you could imagine those valuations really easily, there was like this real pressure to keep it going. And like, also, should we sell or not? Because we told all these people we'd get them a return. We told the angels too. Mm-hmm. Like, they got in really early. 2008 valuations were not high, right? So like, they're going to get an incredible return at like a valuation like that. And then when we had the opportunity to sell the business, we had 3 companies approach us all at the same time. And we're talking about that ballpark for selling the company. So this is what we said we'd do to that class of people.
For context, we were talking like 9-figure acquisition here, right? Like, this was not a trivial number that was being put in front of you.
Yeah. And it was in the process of selling that we started asking ourselves the question like, well, why are we considering selling? And it made us realize that we were actually unhappy. Why were we unhappy? It was like, well, we're trying all this stuff. We're working like crazy. It's not working. It's not fun. And we're not doing the stuff that we're best at, which is like really creative things, like really being world-class at different areas like of marketing and the product, being really long-term focused, being, using our own product a lot, making like all these like simple things, but the short-term pressures are crowding them out. And so we said, hey, instead of selling, let's go fix all that stuff. And if we're profitable, that's the most important piece, because if we're profitable, we'll feel this like confidence again. We hit on this idea of, well, we could get a return for our original angels, and we could get a return for early employees rather, and we could do that with debt. So we raised 17 million in debt and did what's called a tender offer and did a buyback, and basically said, hey, you can decide how much you want to sell, how little, or everything, or some, or none, to everybody. And this is what we're going to do going forward. We're going to be an independent business. And so that's what we did in 2017.
It was like we sold the business.
Yeah.
Or like leveraged buyout of ourselves, I guess, maybe.
No, I remember feeling the gravity of that at the time, thinking like, wow, this is an incredibly big, bold move you guys are making here. This is a meaningful personal liability you're taking on to make this transition happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we took on 17 million in debt, and that year, at the beginning of our year, our revenue was 17 million. So it felt heavy.
Yeah, and we weren't profitable.
Yeah, and it felt heavy for all those reasons. But we also felt like worst case scenario, was it wouldn't work. We couldn't get profitable enough. We'd have to like pay the debt holders something, or we'd have to rework things with them, or we'd have to sell the company basically. And so then the people who would take the biggest hit financially would be us. But we actually liked that. It felt more comfortable because it was like, well, if we're wrong, like we feel the downside, we took care of everybody. And that weight lifted, like I think gave us a lot of freedom. And then of course the business has grown tremendously since then, and we've paid off all the debt.
If I recall, the business got very profitable very quickly. I think to the point where one of the last conversations you and I had in person, Chris, was like, you're kind of shocked.
Yeah, we were shocked.
At how quickly it had turned.
We were on track to lose $3 million when we did the buyback, and the following year we had $6 million in EBITDA. So it was a $9 million swing in like 15 months. So that was insane and amazing and surprising, and it was just like this lesson in why focus is so important. And also just being really clear to the team, like, what are we here to do? It wasn't all roses, like it confused people.
I was going to ask you to kind of unpack that conversation a little bit. Like, there were people who joined thinking this was a high growth, working towards an exit type of life-changing start, kind of central casting startup opportunity. And then you basically pull the rug out from under them and say, just kidding, we're actually just going to be a cash flowing business. I would imagine there were some pretty difficult conversations to be had.
Yeah, the hardest part about that time, I remember, was that because we were doing this tender offer and doing this buyout so employees could basically sell their stock, Chris and I couldn't really talk that, like we couldn't talk that much about the business performance, or like that was
that's what we were advised by our lawyers.
That was the advice we got. Whether
the advice was like,
I don't
basically don't say anything. Because you don't want to.
It's crazy because you're so freaking transparent with literally everything else.
We announced it. We announced that it was going to happen, and we were at an all hands meeting in person. And we're like, so this big news is happening. There's going to be a buyback. This is like the beginning of the next phase of Wistia, blah blah. And now we'll walk away, and like our COO and VP of Finance will explain it to you. And our advice was like basically just don't come to the office. So we kind of hid for like a month because everyone had a month to decide what they're going to do, and we didn't want to like give anyone unfair advice. So we really just like isolated ourselves.
So you can imagine how much chaos this threw the company into, because people just read that all different ways.
It's just like this grenade you guys toss in there.
And I remember, or you've had this on like some slides in a presentation, but the one that really stands out for me of like how confused stuff was. And we felt, when we did this transaction, we felt really good about it and the future of the business, like really confident.
Really quickly, once we hit on it, yeah.
But yeah, people, like a lot of people, some people who were longer tenured left because they weren't sure what the future of the business was going to be. Our Glassdoor reviews got like absolutely lit up with like people leaving, and there was one that was like all caps. It was like, "Do not join this company. It's a sinking ship." Like, or something to that.
Yeah, the
effect.
Founders should have sold when they could.
When they had the chance.
Stay away, basically.
Stay away.
Yeah.
Which is just like to give you a little vignette of how much like chaos and confusion and turbulence there was because we couldn't really talk about it. I mean, we talked about our motivation for doing it, but we couldn't really talk about
and even just
else.
Debt was scary. Mm-hmm. Like just that by itself, because people would say, well, like a mortgage, you don't
pay your mortgage, scary. Like they take your house.
Yeah, it was funny because but what ended up happening is there was a bunch of people who like didn't want to be at this new Wistia, basically. But there was a bunch of people who really want to be at this new Wistia. And yes, we got more profitable, but the other surprising thing was like recruiting got really easy.
Fascinating. How so?
Well, because now people knew what they're signing up for, to learn how to build a business. That's what you get. We had many people who'd be like, I want to see what it's like to be at a company that makes money.
It was a good tool for that period of time. I feel like we had all these venture refugees almost.
Yeah.
They're like, enough of this. I can't do another stint. I need to see what it looks like to work at a profitable business where you're like, felt more connected to reality.
It's interesting you say that because I remember at the time you guys did something pretty unique. And that was when you made the public announcement that this was going on, you basically did like conference calls with people who might be in that same boat or might be considering doing something similar.
The funny thing was like how universal people's experience was, which is like the people we're talking to are obviously, hey, should I do a buyback or something? And in almost every case, they found something successful, but it wasn't going to be really quickly before they got to like 100 million in revenue. They were at like 10 million, 8 million, 20, and maybe they're growing like 20%. And their investors are like, what the hell? And they're like, wait a second, like I've built something great and I could make it greater, but I need to figure out how to do that. And like I need time. It's kind of universal in that way. And the challenge for folks is like, if you raised a lot to get there, it was very hard to do a buyback. It was the folks who, raised one round that was like relatively not too big, basically, that had more options in front of them.
I remember those calls being very energizing, but a similar thing that there are just so many different people were in all kinds of different positions, and it made me feel fortunate that we had raised such a small amount of money and we had grown so much after that to be able, and the math worked for us to be able to do that. Because there were a lot of people who were like, I really want to do that, but like Chris is saying, they'd have to basically defraud their investors to make it happen, or something, purposefully tank the business to make the math work. But obviously there's other creative solutions to it. But it was really fun to when we put that out there, like you said, it wasn't that common, so it became a connection point for a bunch of people we know now, and meeting folks who saw that as a viable path, which was cool because it was hard for us to get advice to do that. That was another thing that made that tricky for us. A lot of people were really steeped in equity investing, and it was odd that you would take on debt in tech. There weren't a lot of financial partners who do that. That's more common now, but it wasn't at the time. And so just to be able to connect into that community was really nice. So I'm glad that we shared that story for that reason.
Those calls were when you were fresh, and there was a lot of venture refugees or people who'd taken on venture, but that was pre-ZERP almost. I mean, not even almost. That was free money, venture flowing in the streets. And it became the kind of goal, not the fuel at a certain point. It became the target. Now living kind of on the flip side of that, part of why I wanted to have this conversation was just because I think this is top of mind for a lot of entrepreneurs right now who have real businesses. But to your point, when you're growing 20, 30% or sub, 2x, 3x growth, it's really, really hard and less interesting to investors to, go approach the venture market. I wonder, how your advice or those calls would go today, given what you've learned and experienced since, and then maybe how you might advise this kind of new cohort of founders who are coming to a similar conclusion, maybe to the one that you did.
The first thing I would say to basically everybody is there's way too much pivoting when people are looking for shortcuts. There's too much looking for shortcuts, I think, where there's all these stories of you see Ramp, unbelievably fast growth. You see Miro, pick your company that's been a recent, very fast growth success that's a SaaS company. People look at that shouldn't I be that? That's the exception, not the rule. You can shoot for it, but I can tell you the way that they got there wasn't by pivoting from each idea 3 months in. That's not how it works. You want to build real value, it takes time. And these people had visions, they had timing, they had other things at play that they have incredible operations, all this stuff going after the same consistent idea. I just think a big mistake people make is they lived through this crazed era and they lived through NFTs, and it's can't I just get really rich really fast? It's no, you can't. That's not the normal thing. That's people hit the jackpot and people win the lottery all the time. And there's people who hit the lottery. That's fine. But you can't live your life just thinking oh, I hope that today I'm gonna hit the lottery, or else you spend all your money on tickets, right? And that's what I see a lot of people doing. And so I think my general advice right now is hunker down, find a problem that's worthy of solving, a big enough problem that you can actually go after, and then find a way to stay focused on it. And from a funding perspective, you have to recognize if you're raising to search for growth, that's really different than raising to serve growth. And when you're searching, that's the most expensive funding you're ever going to raise. You should be really judicious about who those partners are, what your expectations are, what happens if you don't find it, all that kind of stuff. And if it's serving growth, I think that's a different thing entirely. If you kind of know, if you had another team, it's going to change revenue like that. If you spend more money on marketing in this way, it's going to change things over here. If you have a formula, then you can get money lots of different ways. You should look at the different options, but that's how I think about it.
That's great advice.
Oh, thanks, Brown.
It is. I don't have anything to add to that.
Serving versus searching. I actually think that's a great distinction. I also wonder, now that you've kind of lived through your venture-backed competitors coming and going, what's your relationship to capital?
I feel we're way more keyed in to some of the things that are harder like we've learned are much harder to get. Like what's more frightening to me than raising a huge round would be like a lot of product momentum or market momentum. Like those things are hard to earn. They take time and like operational rigor, especially to do it at scale. You could raise a bunch of money and you still might not be able to execute well to deliver that. Having gone through some of these, I don't know, these different cycles, it's more like what Chris is describing. I think we have less dogma around it. I think if you had asked before, we're like die hard, profit and like don't raise venture. And now it's a tool, and there are pros and cons to each of those sides. So there's less of a maybe emotional connection to some of those methods by which you want to do it.
That's a great answer, Brennan.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh my gosh. This is incredible. Okay. So along those lines then, I have a pet theory that the acquisition of Mailchimp ended bootstrapping as we know it.
Oh.
Hot take, agree, disagree. I think you guys came up in an era of like militant, dogmatic bootstrappers.
Yeah.
And I think that animal has gone extinct.
I would say that's true. I wouldn't have assigned it specifically to the Mailchimp acquisition myself, but I think it makes sense. And it is interesting, like knowing them and why they sold. And you talk to Ben Chestnut, and basically he's like, well, I turned 40 and I start thinking about other stuff. And you see people get sick and you see people's lives change and you're like, what am I doing? Like, this is a business. And I do think if you were to go back to us at like when we're like late 20s, we're fucking doing this forever. Like, it's not a business, it's a way of life. You know what I mean? Like, this is like a religion. That's like what it felt like. And there's like a lot of value in having like religious conviction, I think, over how you build things and beliefs and structures. But also like it's irrational. Companies don't exist forever. That really is the exception, like the companies that do. I think Mailchimp being sold kind of woke people up to that. Like if they're gonna sell, whoa. And it's really just that they had been on the journey longer and we knew their story. Like their story was out there. And there's probably thousands of examples that did this exact thing we just don't know, right? And so that's why we weren't talking about it, like in the startup zeitgeist.
Do you think part of the reason for that, Bryce, is that like tech has gotten a lot bigger and there's much more nuance and variety and ways to build and fund a business, whereas in the era where we started, it was more like you could bootstrap or you could go on a huge VC bender and there was less in the middle?
I was recently kind of going back and looking at the first presentation I gave about indie back in like 2013 or something like that. And I remember two contrasting slides. One was, do you remember that Instagram account, Rich Kids of Instagram? So there was like these like baller kids who were like trust fundies who were posting like the craziest trips, private jets, all this stuff. And the other one was like that iconic Johnny Cash image of him like flipping off like really aggressively, like flipping off the crowd. He got in somebody's face. And I think when we started Indie, it felt like that was like, it was a very binary world. Like you were either a militant bootstrapper who really gave your finger to venture, or you went like all in on like that YOLO-ish style, lifestyle. And I think those walls started to come down a little bit as you watched like Atlassian raised a little bit, GitHub raised a little bit. Some of these like very vocal, prolific bootstrappers were choosing this like much more nuanced path. And if you remember back then, people got really upset. Like when GitHub raised money, people felt betrayed in a lot of respects because they viewed the world through this very binary lens. Part of it is those kind of lived examples. And I think part of it is just the funding market's matured so much.
You know what else it makes me think of is, I think that there was a time in that era when it was like, you could pick a product and you'd think, I'm picking it and it's bootstrapped. And I think it's good. And I think that has also changed, where there's so much competition, there's so many SaaS products, there's so many, tech products out there vying for your attention, vying to help you solve problems, that really you just need to be the best. And so the market doesn't care how you're funded anymore. Like, I think maybe the market briefly did when there's less options, but it's not the same type of differentiator that it was. And I think
I'm just laughing. It just reminded me of like I was talking to someone. There's like not much craft software anymore.
Yeah,
it like feels like that. Where everything was it's like more professionalized. It's mature. Yeah,
and it is so hard. Like having done this for a long time, like we can say, it's hard to build great stuff at scale. Like it's hard. There's just huge numbers of people involved, huge numbers of decisions being made. They all like can intertangle with each other. And so when you see something that is really great that solves like a broad set of problems, like that thing wins. And it wins for a reason. Now, do you need to raise money to get there? No, you don't. Like there's lots of different ways to fund your way to it. And I think it depends on how good it is, how unique it is, how differentiated it is, like if people pay up front or not. Like there's a lot of different math you can do to understand this. But I do think that it's still an aspect of a brand that matters, but not as much as it used to.
Yeah, that's an interesting take because, Tom and I talked about this a little bit as it related to GitHub. Like they really leaned into the kind of independent, bootstrapper thing, being counterculture, I think was a big part of kind of how they built that initial audience. You're saying maybe that doesn't, like people don't care. The bar for software is so high right now that if it's good software, it's going to win regardless of whether it's independent or whether.
I think you can look at examples, like I think the project management space, we've seen companies like Monday that came out of nowhere that had an enormous brand budget and just went really hard, and it's like good software that like was able to stake like a very real claim in that market.
Like again, something like Trello, which was more craft software, bootstrap, like until,
and Asana and Basecamp and all these other things. And like, that didn't seem possible before because it wasn't, the understanding of even like online software that people could just sign up and use and get and be hosted. And like that by itself was so unique that was such a great benefit. And now it's so broad, just like, there's ads for software at every airport. There's ads everywhere. Like
the markets are so much bigger for these products too.
People understand how big the markets are, and there's more competition, and ultimately like the markets are so big that there might be still a slice for you that's just focused only on bootstrapper products, and that could be a great. Being counterculture is good to stand out. I want to be really clear on that. Like I think going against the grain is how you get people to pay attention, but just bootstrapping by itself was a way to do that, and it's not as much anymore.
I just think there isn't as much of that like craft software at scale, which is a little bit different than bootstrapping. I think of Arc, the browser, as like one of these, but I'm like struggling to think of other examples. And they've raised a fair amount of venture.
Yeah.
They've raised quite a bit, yeah. When you say that, what do you mean craft software?
I guess I mean, it's like maybe for like a more niche audience, like design forward, like it seems like it's a little bit less concerned just like purely about like growth or like serving a market need, and like quite opinionated in what it's trying to do, and like quirky. It's like different, it like goes against like a lot of the norms, and very like, this is maybe more of a marketing and culture thing, like very culture forward, like the people who are building it, they have like a show on YouTube about like how it's done, which I think is like you'd see more in, it's like similar to some of the bootstrapping businesses where a lot of those folks, and there's like the build in public, obviously that was like really popular, where the people behind it, why they're doing it, what they care about.
Well, it's all become more extreme because that stuff before that was like sharing just stuff on Twitter about how your business is doing and your numbers has turned into you have a show. And the show is interesting and compelling, and it's like on other platforms, and it's on video, and it's like not even necessarily as connected to the product in the way that it used to be really like connected. I think in a lot of cases.
If only there were a product to really highlight business video.
If there was only a product like that, a whole platform really helping you with your video marketing, then you would really save so much time. I do want to say something else though, which is, I want to say one other thing on this, because I think it's like, when people write into support at Wistia, they don't care how many employees there are. They just want the thing fixed. Like, and if it takes us like 6 weeks to do it because we're unwilling to invest more in it, or it takes us like 6 minutes, like they're gonna prefer 6 minutes. And I think that's kind of what I mean is like, you get to enough scale, you get big enough, the market's well enough established, that like someone writes into support, they would give you, there's only so much latitude they're gonna give you when there's like a vibrant market of competitors and all these other options, and they don't put as much value on the brand. When like the early days of the market, I feel like we could get back to someone days later like, well, you guys are just so good. Like, we appreciate you. And we still try to build a brand that has that, but just it's been interesting to watch that expectation shift.
The one kind of lingering thought I've got is like, part of this rush to raise a bunch of venture money has been this idea that like winner takes most. And so if you're not number one or number two, like don't even bother trying to be number three. And typically the winner that takes the most has the most resources, they've raised the most money, they've all this Like, has your attitude towards that changed at all? One, have you seen that play out in your own market? And two, has your attitude around that thought changed at all over time?
I mean, that has not played out that way in our market.
How has it played out for you in your market?
We have a bunch of competitors that are private businesses. We have like a public competitor. We know what a lot of the revenue of a lot of these people are. And I can tell you with a lot of confidence that like the amount of the money that people raise is not that correlated to the amount of revenue they have. And so it's just like, it might be correlated to other things at different points in time. Like what Brennan was saying, product momentum or market momentum. And the question is like, did you turn that into revenue? Did you stick with it? Did you figure it out to get the business model? Or it might be like sometimes it's just like people copying each other, seeing the space, thinking that it's going to be correlated to dollars raised, but it's not correlated to that.
I think our markets have changed a lot over the 18 years too. I mean, when we started, the market we were in was more or less, video hosting, putting video online, of which you had a YouTube, which is free and giant. Like, so that was a case where winner took, almost everything.
Yes.
And then, like Chris was talking about, these overcapitalized competitors that, some people watching this probably remember that like most don't exist anymore, that were like YouTube clones. And then, so we were kind of in that market a little bit, like a paid version of that. And then that market shifted and we became like a video marketing platform because it's about the connection to your other systems. And then there's another big shift in the last few years where we're helping, people make video and make content and repurpose content, and you have much more of like a full service video platform for marketers. So and those are like they're overlapping, but they're also discrete. So it hasn't been the case that there's somebody from day one who was like nailed it, and then we're, just like in their shadow the whole time, which is interesting. I mean, that's just being around a long time in tech. That's
and I think the counterpoint to why our market is not necessarily like every market is like our market grew more slowly than people thought it would, and they underestimated just how much everyone's afraid to get on camera. And like also generationally, that some generations are much more comfortable using video than others. And so that worked to our advantage because the overcapitalized people couldn't grow fast enough to get to the market, wasn't there. But for us, because we didn't overcapitalize, we were able to actually like grow with the market. I think if a market is changing very quickly, very, very rapidly, I do think those are the moments when, if you think you have like a foothold in it, like investing a lot more back into it very rapidly is like more important.
So there's two things I wanted to kind of touch on for sure. One is like tactical stuff. Like I get a lot of people reaching out who, because of the way Indy thinks and talks, they want like very tactical stuff about how to handle cash flow, how to handle like private for a long time, profitable types of businesses. So I want to make sure we hit that. But the other thing I really wanted to hit was, part of the Indy thesis has always been that there's value in controlling your own destiny in ways that maybe aren't obvious. And some of those things come through in the way you show up in your own business, the way you're able to kind of bring your own ideas and creativity to your business in a way that, like I look at some of my favorite bootstrap businesses and I'll often tell the founder, like, if I were on your board as an investor, I would have had to shut down that idea. There's no way I would have approved you doing these kind of like very off the wall, unpredictable types of things. But the funny thing is, those tend to be the things that work really, really well. Those tend to be the things that endear a customer to the brand in ways that like something that's always perfectly tuned to an algorithm or perfectly tuned to kind of a known and understood playbook maybe wouldn't. And I'm curious from your standpoint, kind of post buyout, how that's shown up in the business from your perspective.
I guess one thing that comes to mind, and I mean, everybody's different in this regard, but there has been something very powerful and helpful of knowing there's like nobody else to blame for problems in this business, like, but us. There are like, I think moments that are really hard when you're growing or running a business where at least I've had, you're not really thinking clearly and you're like, well, it's like the board's, you might be on the board, but it's like somebody else's decision is doing this to me, and like relinquishing your own agency in that, which is not necessarily rational, right? Because you have a lot of power to control those things, but where I can think of various moments of clarity we've had, like in really hard moments, where it kind of pivoted on this fact of, like, we care the most about this, and there's nobody else who's going to fix this but us. And so I think that is a powerful thing in, like, when it comes to bootstrapping or how, you know, your business is organized. It is our problem to fix, right? It is our problem to fix. We have agency to do that. Like Chris was describing this buyout, and it didn't, like, structurally and legally, we had the same controls before and after. The expectations were different with the stakeholders around the business, but the board was the same before and after. You know, we owned more of the business, but like that wasn't, you know, we didn't own so little that we didn't have actual control over it. And it really was about like the psychology of it in a big way for us.
Yeah, it seems like there's a moment probably where, I don't know, something I hear from entrepreneurs who've raised a lot of venture money is it's not their money. Right? Like there's a very cavalier attitude towards the money that they've raised. That, like, this is risk capital. The VCs are okay losing it all. It's there to serve them. You know, I'm interested to hear, like, did your relationship with money in the business change kind of post transaction? And was that unique to you two as owners, or did that get felt through the organization?
There's a different mentality though in the company, and we did see this after the buyback, which is like, no one's coming to help us. Like it's on us. We made a real focus on profit, obviously, after the buyback, so we had to be profitable, and we started talking about gross margin a lot, which we had not been. Like it was coming up every once in a while, but you know, right, like the first all hands meeting after the buyback, you know, we always went through financials. There would literally be no questions. And the first one after the buyback, it's like, any questions?
If there was a question, it'd be like, why are we talking about this?
Yeah, basically. And the first one after that, it's like the questions was like half the hands in the room went up. And they're like, why do we spend this on these 2 office spaces? Like, why are we spending that over there? Like, why are we doing this? And I remember very vividly, there was a team that came to us after that all hands, and they said, hey, I think I can get us like a few points of gross margin. Should we do that? It's going to take a few weeks. We're like, yeah. They came back. They announced at the next all hands meeting that they'd gotten 3 points of gross margin. Everyone cheered. And
Standing ovation.
Yeah, and so it was that was extremely different than it was before. It was like, we are responsible ourselves for dealing with this. And honestly, it came up like in COVID, when COVID hit. And it's like, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? How generous are we going to be with customers? Because like people switched to video overnight, but that also means tons of people had instant, unbelievable overages. And lots of businesses were really hurting. And we basically talked about it. It was a pretty easy decision to make. We were like, we're profitable going into this. Our customers have taken care of us. We're going to take care of them. We were really generous with folks who were going way over. We made Wistia free for hospitals. We did all these different things. And the team knew no one was coming to save us. Like, it's just us. I think that that's been like ingrained in the culture at this point, where not just in financials, but like the core metrics of how the business of how products are performing and what's working and what's not. It's like this real honesty and openness of like, hey, you want to hire more people, or you want there to be raises. Like, you want this, like, the company's got to grow. But like, we're in control, so we can do it. And I think that's like, I think it's what you want in any business. I think it's when you have too much money, it's easy to lose sight of caring at this level.
It's like self-reliance. It feels like an old like pioneering value or something.
Yeah.
Is there anything you did incentive-wise or compensation-wise to reinforce that?
Yeah, we introduced profit sharing. We said we're going to take a percentage of EBITDA that's going to go directly to the team, and we decided to anchor it on salary, because we were auditing people's salaries. So, you know, if you've been here a short time or a long time, if you're both really senior and you're doing the same role, like, you should be getting paid the same. That's how it works. So we had systems in place to basically already audit, make sure we're paying people equitably on the salary side. And then it's kind of easy to understand, because it's like, hey, your bonus could be 0 or it could be up to whatever, 10% based on how EBITDA performs. Now, the interesting thing is, like, we did that for 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 years.
And then we realized, hey, we have more stuff we want to invest in. And so we're not just going to optimize for more profit now. We're going to have to like balance that. So because it's a bonus, we change it. We change it here, change it there. But that was a big difference after the buyback.
So how did you reformat it for kind of growth and profit?
Well, we formatted it like probably 4 different times.
This is what I want to understand. Like, what are the mistakes? What have you gotten wrong along the way, and where are you?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a mistake. I think it's just a way the world works is like really simple foundational incentives matter. If we're only incentivizing profit and we want to invest more in long-term value, where does that value go? It goes to equity holders. So what did we do? We reintroduced stock options.
Oh, interesting. So post buyout, you didn't have stock options.
Yeah, we had no stock options for like 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
And then we were not having trouble hiring people. And then we realized, wait a second, as owners of this business, COVID made our market feel early stage again, because now everyone sees their computer as a camera. And now the expectation is like, of course you can make a video. Anyone can make a video. That was not how it felt in like 2019. And we knew that because we had video creation tools, and that's what people told us. And a hosting platform for years, that's what people told us. And so we saw this change happen, and we thought, wow, this is the moment that our markets become early stage. Like it's an early stage market again. And just like I was talking about before.
This was a mere, 13, 14 years into the business at that point?
Yeah, 14 years in. And then the other thing we realized is like the market doesn't care at all that we've been doing this for 14 years. They don't care. Doesn't matter. What they want is better products that are easier to use. They want anyone on their team to be able to make a video. They want the video to be good. They want to be able to share it. They want anyone to be able to edit. They want anyone to be able to put on a live event that looks great. And they also want great hosting, and they want a great player and all that stuff. In 2021, we said we're going to double our product engineering team this year. We're going to invest more in a bunch of things. And so we were really profitable. And we said we're going to be a lot less profitable. And we're going to hire all these people and do all this stuff. And we're going to dramatically expand the platform. And so when we started doing that, we realized, hey, we need to incentivize people differently.
Yeah, we were misaligned,
Yeah.
basically. The incentives were misaligned between like us and the team at that point. So
Yeah.
we did spend a while trying to basically reinvent equity.
We did,
We
yeah,
were
yeah.
like, thankfully we didn't implement any of those things because they would have been a failure. But we definitely
Lawyers are good for that.
went on some boondoggle of, I don't know, phantom shares or these like vintages of profit sharing units that would come due in the future. Yeah, we had all kinds of stuff. And then we're like, wait a second, isn't there something that can...
Yeah, and actually it was after, I feel like we introduced equity after MailChimp's acquisition, to go back to that thread.
That's true, yeah.
And we realized that like, we had always told the company, even if when we had no equity, if we sell the business, we're gonna take care of everyone on this team. Because morally, we would just do that. That's what we would do. And everyone was like, well, what would that mean? And when the MailChimp thing happened, we're like, it would be helpful to have people know what that would mean. Because
MailChimp was literally like an all hands and kind of like surprise.
And
Yeah.
they did give a lot of money back to employees as part of that sale.
I understand, but it came as cash, right? So I would imagine it got taxed at an income versus...
people had different expectations, right? Like there's people who were there for a lot longer than somebody else, and I think they got the same payout and they weren't expecting it. And I think it was just like expectations were not clear. So we thought, okay, options make sense because we really feel that our market's early stage again. Makes sense because if we were to sell, everyone would get a return. We still have the bonus, and we use the bonus, and it's really what happens now is just tied to our annual goals. So we set annual goals, and some of them are like the most important ones, and we basically say, some years it's EBITDA, some years it's MRR, some years it's usage of a specific new product, and we put them together so everyone knows what we're trying to align on and get those incentives right. But there is always this balancing act between short-term and long-term, and that's where I think the equity has been helpful. But even there, we've told people, look, like we're not planning on selling the business today, but as we grow over time, like we'll get you liquidity the way we did in the past. Like we did buybacks, like so there'll be that's like a pretty simple way to get you value on that thing. But that's to reward this like long-term value creation, build the platform, really lead in the space. And right now, you're going to be compensated with like amazing benefits and comp and bonus and flexible work and all the other things, which are the reasons why people join the company in the first place.
Given you're just swimming in cash, how...
You're funny.
Have you found any tax efficient ways to getting money out of the business, be it through distributions, bonuses are going to get taxed as income. Have you found a more tax efficient way? A lot of the things that I hear from Bootstrap founders are people who've raised, who are generating cash, but aren't interested in selling, don't have a plan to sell anytime soon, is that they're kind of getting crushed on trying to get cash out of their business. And so they're typically, when they come to me, they're looking for kind of a secondary type of arrangement where we're buying common stock or some kind of stock. So the tax efficiency of an equity transaction kick in. Have you guys cracked any codes on any of that?
I don't think we've
No,
cracked
I don't think we've cracked a code. I think that we do hear from a lot of our other friends who are either bootstrapped or like close to it, that that the secondary has been the simplest way for a lot of people to do it. You can do qualified dividends, but it's still not like, it's to get the QSBS, which a lot of folks have, I believe usually that has to be like an equity transaction.
I think I don't think you can get QSBS on. I mean, this is not tax advice, but I don't know that you can get those unqualified.
Yeah, if anyone's, I want to be very clear. It's not advice, but it's advice from Bryce, not us, okay?
Advice from Bryce.
Yeah, so we haven't cracked any codes. We like paying taxes, but not more than needed. We are profitable, so we do pay taxes.
How do you, with all that cash, the temptation, like we've seen at others, is to really go expand and contract a lot on the product front. You guys are incredibly creative. How do you manage that creativity with the focus on Wistia as the business or the vehicle for your business creativity versus sending Wistia off into a million different directions, or you personally going off in a million different directions?
I think it's just like, we really believe that the markets that we're in, the markets that are growing around us are so big that there's so much opportunity that like it seems irrational not to work there to find the creative solutions and to do the innovating. I think if we believed that our market was not growing or stagnant, like we would be insane to be doing what we're doing. Like we would have to basically just go max like cash generation. And I think, there's an interesting thing that happens with subscription businesses, which is like you can build momentum in a subscription business and the momentum can sustain for a while. Like it really can. And I think a lot of folks, you can kind of get addicted to that, where it's like, oh, well, we're not investing way more, but the revenue's still growing. So there's times like, this feels really good. And I think that the truth, though, is in big markets, you're just inviting more competition. So I feel like the answer to a lot of this stuff, but this is another example, is like, it's a nuanced answer, which is we think being profitable puts us in the right headspace to be long-term focused and be really creative, take the right risks. But at the same time, we think our market's so big, we really need to invest aggressively in it. So we're so profitable, we brought down our profitability targets, and we are patient enough to say, hey, we're gonna invest in a lot of things, and we're gonna need to see like the leading indicators move first. And we can be patient as to when the revenue shows up. That's kind of how we've balanced things. If we weren't seeing leading indicators move, and we felt that we had invested enough there, we would probably retrench and become more profitable again as a way to like build up a buffer to do different types of investments. But if we do see those things working, we have high confidence that the leading indicators will eventually become indicators, and those will eventually become lagging indicators, aka like revenue, then we keep investing. And that's kind of how we've been doing it. And honestly, that has worked out better than I thought it would have as well.
How so? How did you think it was going to work out?
There's just a temptation to think that the things are simple. Like I unfortunately know too many founders who are so, and I was talking about this before, so short-term focused that if they work on something for 6 months, they don't see the number move, they think that there's no market there. And that doesn't mean that. It means that like brands hold.
But I don't get the sense you just like, you make a decision once and then you never look at the numbers again and you just go heads down and say, we're going to keep investing here with conviction.
No, there's certain gates that you want to get through. So you invest in something new. And what we're looking for at the beginning is we're not looking for like rocket ship revenue to take off. We're looking at comments. We're looking at feedback. We're looking at demos. We're looking at designs. We're looking at like, does the design look right? Does it look like it's actually going to solve the problem? And then like the next step is like you show to a customer and they eventually say like, oh, this looks cool. I want this. And we just understand that if you get 10 people who love a thing that's new, that's early, that probably means that 10 can become 100. And if you get 100, that probably means you can get 1,000. But the thing that a lot of people stop at is like, if you get 1,000, you can go to 10,000. If you go to 10,000, you go to 100,000. If you go to 100,000, you go to 1 million. It's actually often very similar, the thing that gets you to 1 million that was the same thing that got you to 10. But I think like people get confused and they don't really realize like how big markets are and how far you can take things. So we're looking for that early 10. We're looking for that. And it might be all qualitative feedback to start. And there are many times we've built things and you try to show it, you can't get 10. Or it's just not, it isn't the right problem. So you give up on it.
And I think we have an advantage right now in this world is like the things that we're going after are large known markets. Like for instance, we have a big multi-year investment that will continue forever in live video and the webinar space. If we don't succeed, like we are succeeding there. If we hadn't in the first year or two, then the question is, okay, our approach to it is incorrect. Not that the market isn't there, because clearly that it's like irrefutable that there is a market to do that. And obviously we saw an opportunity for how we would be differentiated there. And the same thing, a lot of the other new things that we're doing, or like building an editor into our product. Like we know that so deeply from our customer base and time in the market, as opposed to we're building something that's never been seen by humanity.
And people
before.
were asking for it. And so if they're asking for it and then we're doing it, they're not using it, that's on us. You have to have that honesty of like, same thing with webinars. Like people have asked for webinars forever, and we didn't because we were focused on like the point solution versus the platform. We broadened our view, and then now like, okay, we got to really do it. And if we can't get it good enough, that means that that's on us versus them not wanting it.
And that type of investment is so much different. Like almost all of ours are in that bucket versus like failures we've had in the past. Let's say like 360 video is an easy one to pick on for us, right? Like it was a cool fad. We got some laughter. It's like a cool fad, and we're like, this is going to be like it, but nobody's asking for it. Like nobody wants it or is asking for it.
Nobody wants 360 video in their office. They want it on a ski slope.
Yeah. And people didn't even really want that either. So
True. The two words you guys keep coming back to that I think is fascinating are confidence. So it seems like you've built up the institutional confidence to kind of know when to let things run and when to kill them.
Yeah.
And then patience, like knowing when to have patience with things. I think, part of this Hall of Mirror issue, that I think a lot of startups have ingested over this kind of last phase of startup growth has been, they hear these rules of like 10, 10, 5, 5, 3, 3 of these, like, if you're not growing 10x for the first 2 years and then 5x and then, 3x, 20% and 30% looks really unflattering and deflating in a lot of ways. And yet 16 years in or 18 years in, you guys have the benefit of seeing like what 20, 50, 100+% compounding can do to a business, which feels like that perspective is really, it informs a lot of these decisions and a lot of the way you're building the company now.
That's right. I think the everything you said, the confidence piece, understanding when to keep going, and the patience so you can get things to work. And I think like this is kind of simple, but a lesson that we've had to relearn and has really become like a part of how we build the company is like, if you have a group of smart people and they have a goal and they stay on it, you'd be surprised how often they break through. And once they break through and they understand what the customer problem was or need or the way that we should solve it, often what ends up happening is they break through again, but this time it's faster. And then again and again, and then their view of what they can accomplish gets bigger. And so the same exact team that started slow and maybe started with stuff that wasn't working eventually turns into this like team that if someone were looking, it's like unbelievable. How is it doing this? It's the same people, same space. It's just that like we let the learning and the effort like compound. And that was how it was in the early days too. It's just that we figured that out with a small number of people, and then the scaling of that was what was hard.
Yeah, and I think to add like some nuance to the patience piece, we have a lot of patience around where we believe in the market when the commercial results will show up, or some of these lagging indicators, but have become, I'd say, more impatient and have more conviction around some of the operational pieces for how quickly those teams need to, whether that's like ship, try things, and learn. If you have that working, and you need to be impatient about that, but you can't just like let a team sit there and stare at a whiteboard, for 6 months. Like you're not going to get anything out of that. But if they're like bringing things to market or running marketing campaign, like actively trying things at a very fast clip, and you give them the time, like you're saying, that's like where we've found success. So you're like impatient about one side of it,
yes,
and then patient about the longer term results.
I remember hearing Jason Fried say something like, I've been at this so long, I don't even relate to startups anymore. Like people come and ask me for advice and I got nothing for them. I've been running a non-startup for a long time now. I actually can't relate at all to what these kids are doing anymore. Do you guys feel that at all?
Yes, I do. You're a little more tapped in.
Yeah, you're very isolated now.
I am, yes. Highly isolated.
I don't know if it's like isolated. I think it's just incentives, right? It's like people have different, what I'll say is like, there's a lot of stuff that we've learned having done this long enough that we'll see a new thing and we'll kind of like give a glance to each other. And I think we understand, like we both think we know what's going to happen with it, or like how it could play out, or like a competitor, maybe it's like a small competitor raises money from some certain thing. We're like, oh, they're going to do this now. And then they often do. And I think it's just like, we've had so many experiences and so many hours at this stuff that like there's advice now that we've given ourselves or we've gone wrong. We've talked about a lot of in this interview. We've gotten it wrong and then we got it right. Stop listening to our instincts. You make worse mistakes when you don't listen to your instincts. Like we fell too far away from profitability and it's actually counterintuitive, but it lets you be more long-term to be profitable. It's easy to say that, hard to do. Like I think there's a lot of, that's what I more notice is that there's people hungry for incredibly fast results and then they can't figure out why they're not getting it. And actually like it takes time to build up your own instincts on what stuff's going to work and what stuff's not, and what things play in your market. And like if you look at it from the perspective of like, actually what I need time in the game. I need time to figure it out. That's kind of hard advice to give, is like keep trying, but like that is more what I see the difference. And I do relate to people who've been at it. Like I relate to consistency. I relate to people who like anyone who's been at this for a long time and has scaled it and been through a lot of the challenges. There'll be like lots of hard won lessons. And like, yeah, you know how to stay at it. And like you enjoy it. Like that's cool. But I think it's like when you're looking for the shortcuts, there's just mostly not shortcuts. It's mostly long cuts.
That introduces real tension, especially to that, if we're back to our black and white world of bootstrapped or venture-backed startup. The venture-backed startup is typically raising kind of every 12 to 24 months. Like that doesn't exactly lend itself well to patience.
No. It's also with people. We've had a lot of people who have stayed here a long time. And I think about this all the time. Like sometimes there'll be someone who's here for like 2 years, 3 years, and then suddenly they come into their own and they're like taking on all these awesome things and making this huge progress. And I think about how quickly companies like churn through folks, and I don't know what the average tenure is right now. I know for a while in tech it was like 1.5 years or something. And I just feel sad basically for everyone. I feel sad for the employees and I feel sad for the companies that they didn't have the chance often to let people get really good. And that takes time.
Yeah, it takes time to build relationships, get a team performing really well. Like those things don't happen without time and investment.
Yes.
Well, you guys have done an amazing job. Looking at the website, I was like, man, I see a lot of faces that are still there who were, in the room when we did that event at your space 7 or 8 years ago. That says a lot.
It's pretty cool. We have every month at our All Hands, we always celebrate anniversaries. And I'm always surprised by like the number of people who have been here for like a 4-year college, the number of people who have been here that could have gotten a PhD, and like then the number of people who are like maybe like, the postdoc as well. It's kind of funny to think about like careers like that. And it's also amazing. Like we feel fortunate that all these people choose to continue to be here and to scale and to work and to, help the company evolve through all these evolutions. So it's cool.
Something you guys have a lot to be proud of for sure. Pretty wild to think where you were when this all started and look at you, full grown adults running this thing like, all stars.
Yeah, thanks, Dad.
I'm always curious, like, what do you, to the founder who is looking at this like venture landscape and saying to themselves, like, that isn't me. I think there's more and more people who are feeling that, but it feels so unknown and it feels like such a different, maybe even harder path. Like, is there anything you could share with them, maybe from your younger self or your more experienced self now, that to demystify it a bit more?
I feel like the challenges we have are largely the same. I mean, in growing and scaling a business, it's like a lot of operational challenges, focus. Like whether you have a ton of money in the bank or you're running profitably and barely scraping by, like you can mess that up. Like you can, spread yourself way too thin, or you can be really like disciplined and focused and be consistent and have patience. Like those, maybe one of those models lends itself more to that than the other, but I feel like in talking to friends who are on, maybe the other side or raised a ton of money in venture, doing like the problems they're facing are the same ones that we struggle with. Like how to build product momentum, how to build great software at scale, how to like differentiate your brand. Like these are the things that like take up 90% of our time, I'd say.
I agree with everything Brendan said. I think the other piece is that it's basically just everything comes down to people. Like that's what a company is. It's a collection of people working on the same thing, ideally. The advice I would give to folks is like find people you really want to work with and take risks on people who are like you believe can grow really fast. They don't have to have done it before, but that you vibe with, that like the vibe of the work is fun. Because that is basically what ends up happening is like people burn out. And when they burn out, it doesn't work. It's often because they're like tired, they don't like the company they've built, they're not like really getting along with the people that they think they need to scale. And I think the thing is like the world is big enough. Like there's enough people. There's like whatever, 350 million people in the US alone. Like you can find some people who like you really gel well with and who it's actually like enjoyable to do the work with. And like, I think that gets underestimated. And I think like when you don't go the venture path, you have a little bit more time because you don't have the same pressure to try to find that. And like, yeah, it's the patience and the consistency and the confidence. And like, look, compounding works. Like that's the other thing is like when you compound things, it works, but you have to keep doing it to compound it. And so I just think a lot back to the day-to-day is like, you enjoy the people you work with, if they're fun, if they're smart, if they're passionate, if they're humble, all the things that you need to be in a great environment, it's much easier to keep doing it. It's much easier to build something big. It's much easier to build something like real.
There's your mic drop.
Ship it. We're done. That's it.
That was awesome.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks. Those are good questions. Good grenade right from the start.